Hey, everybody, this is Dave, the Cornbread Man, here with the Southern Fried Podcast, and we're honored today to have a lawyer and an author. And he is the author of this book, The Zenith Man, or just Zenith Man, and it's a great story. I had an opportunity to talk to Mr. McCracken Poston Jr. a couple of weeks ago, and I bought the book. I thank you for autographing it. It is a fantastic story. It's a true story, and it is your story as well as your clients. And I like how you combined both of those in the book. You were very, I guess I would say, exposing of your own life, of what was going on in your life while all this other was going on. You were on a journey just like your client was. And so thank you for the time that you're going to give us today. We appreciate it. Tell us about the Zenith Man and about McCracken Poston. A lot of our local listeners may know you. I've had people tell me that they know you. Others say I'm not as familiar, but they'll say I've heard of your client, Alvin, and they're interested. So tell us, introduce yourself and tell us about the Zenith Man.
Well, Dave, first, thanks for having me. It was a delight to meet you kind of by chance the other day out on Nashville Street in Ringgold, Georgia, and certainly appreciate you having me on and reading this story. And it's funny, as you were introducing me, I realized that I'd been telling this story for a quarter of a century, and I ruined a lot of dinner parties talking about cockroaches and rats and skunk, and I've seen a lot of uncomfortable hosts of dinner parties, but I only told the story as I did for 20 years at least as, wow, this weird case. And I started reading about how do I write this. And I even wrote some chapters just to preserve the events, such as the cat story about Alvin's cats. I thought that was so quaint and so revealing of who he really was.
Yes.
That I just wanted to preserve it as it happened. So I had bits and pieces put together for years, but I think what was I couldn't put my finger on was I didn't feel comfortable just saying Alvin's an odd guy. Is a very strange man. And after he and I participated in the Forensic Files program, which has been repeating monthly for 25 years. And while I appreciate it, it is my least favorite telling of the story.
Yes.
And you'll once you know the huge mistake I made in hiring one so-called forensic pathologist, he was the one that pitched it to Forensic Files. And so he's on it talking about an issue that wasn't even an issue at trial, as if he was the scientist that broke the case open. That issue that he's discussing and that they're discussing was not ever an issue at trial. And that was the post-mortem artifact of a puncture to the neck to draw blood after first responders and the coroner's office showed up. But now he's made it like that was a huge issue at trial that he solved. And it made me so mad that that I basically told him, I'm not sure if we want to participate. And ultimately they said, well, he pitched it to us, so we're going to leave him in it. So I was very upset. And then, of course, I had to see it every month for 25 years. But I would get responses from people all over the world. So I knew it was a good story. The more and more I read, and I think a lot of people would like to write a book. I think a lot of people would like to tell their stories. And so I went straight to the reference section of bookstores anytime I would go in, and I would find out, well, what is it? What is this? Is it true crime? I'm not fully satisfied that you would call it that. Memoir comes to mind as something that it absolutely is.
Yes.
But that necessarily pulls me in. And to write any good memoir, you have to show how it affected you as the writer.
Yes.
And so that was an important lesson that I learned relatively late, um, that I needed to describe. And everything in the book is true, um, but a lot of it was repressed. I My mother kept a journal, and she passed away about 6 years ago. But she kept a journal, and none of my sisters and I we really don't want to read that because we've had a lot of divorces, and
Yeah.
we just don't need the reminders of the bad old days. But but I said, I'm going to get one because I remembered taking Alvin to see my parents to kind of calm him. He always liked them. My dad was always traded with him, and that one little bit of my mother's journal reminded me of the turmoil that was going on around the time Virginia died. It was our first intervention that we ever did, first and last intervention that we ever did for my father, who suffered from alcoholism his entire adult life. And, and it reminded me, wow, yeah, I was going through this. I had just remarried, or I was about to. I hadn't remarried yet, but I was about to. And um, and just what a mess life was while I was trying to help this man who was very difficult to understand, who seemed hell bent on kneecapping everything I was trying to do for him. And you know, we later learned, much later, 21 years after the trial, exactly what made Alvin tick. Um, and that was with his autism diagnosis at age 79. And
Amazing.
Dave, what really was amazing was how that diagnosis lifted him. I have never seen anything like it in my life. How he was um, happier. He was a lot more open to people and a lot more outgoing. And when the book came out, he really uh, started to shine. Um, we went to my publisher's choice. We opened the book. We launched the book, not in Ringgold, but at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library in Atlanta. And I had tried to involve, I got some great blurbs for this book, by the way. John Meacham, who is a, Pulitzer Prize winning presidential historian. It's almost funny when people look at my book and they look at me and they go, "You got John Meacham? How did you do that?" Well, the other is Rory Kennedy,
Yeah.
who was the daughter of Senator Robert F. Kennedy. She was actually in the womb, in her mother's womb, standing next to her father when he was assassinated at the hotel in Los Angeles in 1968, and Rory was born about 6 months later. And then and Jonathan Carl from another national news. I can't remember if he's ABC or CNN now. I can't keep up with him. But so I had some heavy hitters, going to bat for the book in terms of, letting people know, hey, we've read the early galleys of this thing and we like it. So that was fun. That was a fun, and the whole process of telling this story has been cathartic. It's been like I would imagine what good therapy feels like.
Yeah.
Because I got to, there's a lot of family things that very often in families are the cause of shame and repressed guilt and things like that. And I let my sisters know this is our story, I want your permission to tell about our father. And they all signed off on it. And so I'm very lucky in that respect. But my father was a great, great human being.
Sure.
He just suffered from this disease. And so he, I won't go into it too much more than that, but that's the part about throwing myself into the book. For one, you're supposed to do that in memoir, but secondly, I didn't know how deeply I was until I started writing the book. And I had a 90,000 word contract. I had no real idea what 90,000 words were. And I didn't even know there was a word counter on our computers.
Yeah.
And so I just flew into writing it thinking, oh, this feels like a lot of words, but I'm sure, 90,000, it may not be that. Well, at the end, when the dust cleared, I had written 177,000 words,
Oh, wow.
almost three shy of two books. And so then several months of editing began. And Citadel, which is an imprint of Kensington Books, which is the largest independent publisher, it was really nice because they had like 5 copy editors. They were challenging everything factually and spelling and those kind of things. We had a one falling out whether the F in Lafayette is capitalized. And I said, well, of course it is. And they said, well, your city of Ringgold doesn't capitalize it. And I'm thinking like, well, probably because just somebody typed it in. But, I went out to the freeway and took pictures of the exit and said, look, capital F. And to further the Lafayette misery, the book was sublet, I guess you'd say, to Highbridge audiobooks. Well, I just assumed that maybe I would get to read my own book because I lived it.
Yeah.
I knew exactly how Alvin sounded. I knew exactly how other people sounded. Not that I was going to do impersonations, but I could, at least do some inflections. And my editor at Kensington said, "Oh no, you won't do it." And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to. It's my story." And she said, "I'm sorry, we've got the right to put it with who we want to put it with, and these readers have followings." So this guy had fans, and his name is Lee Gottel, and I recognized his voice from TV commercials. But at the same time, he was from that accentless Midwest sound, and they totally ignored a week that I spent making a pronunciation guide. And he said, Lafayette. And I quit listening at that moment. But everybody else says they like the audiobook, but I just quit listening because it just hurt too much.
I have some friends who have got the audiobook. They live up in Pennsylvania. They probably it would make a difference. I didn't think about it till you were speaking about that and all going through this. This story to me, and I may be wrong. I'm no expert. It would make a great movie. I mean, it would make a fantastic movie.
Well,
to see all that laid out in visual,
as they say, from your lips to God's ear. But there has been movie interest in this story before. Back in right after the trial, and the reason I know Rory Kennedy, who is a Emmy-winning documentarian, or I guess I should say documentary filmmaker or a producer, director. her office reached out to me right at the end of the trial, but they weren't reaching out to me about Alvin. They were reaching out to me about the trial right before Alvin. Uh,
Oh,
she did a documentary called American Hollow, and if you ever get a chance to see it, it's a very good documentary. Her father was interested in the plight of Appalachian
okay.
people, the poverty in Appalachia. And I think it was a nod to her father to follow up on how's Appalachia doing. So they had some Eastern Kentucky family from up in the mountains that they were following, and kind of one of the kind of the you didn't see him up close, but you kind of saw his wake was Joe Canada, who I tried, defended in a murder charge immediately before Alvin's case. So her office was calling about Joe Canada, what happened in that case, because we were about to put this film in the can, and we want to put a epilogue at the end. So of course I wanted to talk to a Kennedy, so I kept calling him back. Well, Rory did not know that they had reached out to me, so she thought Joe Canada's lawyer is calling her. This can only mean a cease and desist order,
Oh,
or anything like that. So she ignored me. But to
oh,
her credit, after the film was in the can, she called me. And I said, well, I'm just returning your call. And she didn't realize her staff had been calling me. So we ended up having some laughs about that. But then, the conversation, just like yours and my conversation did the other day, it went on to other interesting stories and cases. And I told her about Alvin. And she said that her fiance, Mark Bailey, was a screenwriter. He was very interested in stories like this. And I talked to him and I said, absolutely. And so uh, Mark Bailey called me and we hit it off, and it just seemed like a really nice guy. And he said, we're about to get married, and when we're back from our honeymoon, I'd like to come meet you and Alvin and talk about this. And so, the family has had so much tragedy in it, and it did not end because it was their wedding that JFK Jr. died flying to.
oh, wow.
So their wedding got postponed. I just thought, man, this is so tragic, and I would not blame them for forgetting any plans that we had ever made. And then you kind of pick up, because everything is known about everybody these days. You hear that they went off to Greece or somewhere and got married. I just thought I'll never see this again. And lo and behold, Mark Bailey called me and said, I'm almost to Chattanooga.
Oh, wow.
Where can I stay that allows me to bring this dog that I have with me? And he brought a bull mastiff named Clementine. And I put her up in my goat pen, separated from the goats, and this New York bull mastiff, who probably looked 250 pounds. I don't know how much she weighed, but she was trembling at the sight of my goats. So city dogs, I guess.
Yeah.
But in any event, Mark wrote a screenplay that I never read. He told me I would not like it because he had the license to change things, and he would tease me about it. He would say, well, you're a woman this week, and things like that. And I didn't care as long as the gist of the story got out, but I retained literary rights with New Line Cinema in my deal. And Alvin and I, we enjoyed a small, I guess, annual payment for 5 years, where Alvin got a little more money in his pocket, and but then it kind of fell apart. The company fell apart, and when they got reconstituted, this was a green light. I still had my intact my rights to write a book about it. And so enough had been on the internet. You can go on the internet now in New Line Cinema, Zenith Man, McCracken Poston, Alvin Ridley, and it'll be there, the announcement of their green lighting of the movie. But unfortunately, Alvin and I, we were just giving this story away. And we gave it away so much to anybody that wanted to talk about it. And that was fine because, it's a good story, but I still couldn't explain Alvin. So I kind of enjoyed it when Alvin came along and was part of it too, because people could make their own judgments about him. But in 2019, I was shocked to see that somebody had picked up all these bits and pieces of us telling the story.
Oh.
They picked out the title that I had, fictionalized version of our story. Although it was a very small, short book, like a 45-minute read, they changed our names. They changed the location to Pennsylvania. But they took my title away from New Line. So I added this unwieldy subtitle, Death, Love, and Redemption in a Georgia Courtroom. Because I was told you got to have a subtitle to distinguish it from that other book. Now, I've probably caused her to get some name, but I was just so stubborn because it's in the book. A younger person who was a contemporary of my second wife, who was just a half generation behind me, that didn't know who Alvin Ridley was, but they just knew that there was this very odd man that hung out on the building that had the Zenith sign. And so Jeff Keith said, "Hey, I hear you're helping the Zenith Man." And I immediately thought, that's the kindest words I've ever heard about Alvin Ridley, and it's not Crazy Alvin or Sinister Alvin or Boogeyman Alvin. So I just always thought if I ever write something, it's going to be called Zenith Man. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I reclaimed the title. Like I said, I've probably caused the author of the way. I don't think that I'm enriching them by shining a light on the title Zenith Man, but it is what it is. There's no copyright in titles. I could have called it the Coca-Cola Man and gotten away with it. There's no copyright in titles.
I didn't know that. When you go in the business, Sarah, we've been meeting there weekly, doing videos in and around town, and that sign is there. It all kind of comes together. You just kind of see that with this book, and it's, I don't know, there's a weird feeling about it when you're there. And I'm local, but I wasn't right in the center of town every day, and I don't know that I ever went in that store when he had it. But it is neat that they have captured life and the case and everything. And I was sitting there drinking coffee and I looked up and I went, oh, well, it makes perfect sense. Now I see the Zenith sign, And so it's a great title. I love the title. Just a couple of questions I have that I don't know. And I'm not done with the book. Yeah, I'm working on it. It's just awesome. But when Alvin passed, was he buried locally?
Yeah.
In the Leland area?
He is next to his wife. And that's part of the book as well. I realized while I was representing Alvin at some point that he was very transactional. That, in other words, I could get his cooperation, which I'd been dying to have, but I had to pay for it. But see, I was so invested in him now and in his case, and I felt like he's innocent. Several months into it, I realized I think the guy's innocent. I think she had a seizure, and she's got the markings of somebody that had a seizure, died of a seizure. And so, I just still couldn't get Alvin to cooperate. So I realized that, I would take him to lunch a good bit, and I'd feed him, and then I would get a little cooperation from him. And at some point, I was paying him to cooperate. I was just paying him. And then one time, I just thought, well, I want him to know that I care. And so I said, take me to Virginia's grave. Well, down at the Gordy Memorial Cemetery off Gordy Circle, south of Ringgold, there's two Gordy cemeteries in Catoosa County, but this is the one that's down 41 below the last exit there in Catoosa County, the Tunnel Hill exit, as we call it. And I guess technically this may be a Tunnel Hill address, but it's in Catoosa. You go down and there's a Gordy Circle on the left. Another hack in getting there is get off at the southbound scales where the truck scales. Gotcha. And go to the exit on the back, and it'll put you out on Gordy Circle.
Okay.
And then you turn left, and the cemetery's right there. Well, I went and, even took some little grocery store flowers that I had picked up so that we could be paying our respects to Virginia. And the grave was still, kind of fresh looking. But all there was as a marker was that little metal temporary thing with a piece of paper in it that's stabbed down into the ground. And I said, Alvin, you don't have a stone for her? And then I looked, and his parents did not have stones. His father had been gone for like 15 years. You couldn't even read the bleached out piece of paper on the little metal stake. And so I just felt really bad for him. Now, Alvin, I got him on disability, and ultimately I got him his Social Security 10 years later, but I got him an income coming in because he clearly suffered from some disability. The autism was not diagnosed for quite some time, but a paranoid condition. The state psychologist found somatization, which is the feeling that you have physical ailments that may not be there, but you feel them. And of course, this is what led to the, so difficult to deal with. But I said, Alvin, let me get you stones. If you'll continue to help me, I will get you stones. So we went to Ringgold Monument up the street here. And I had all of his parents' death certificates and Virginia's death certificates. So we had dates of birth and dates of death. And I was helping him fill all that out. And then I said, look, Alvin, there's something that you can just pick to put there. Just something, some memory or something that you want them to be remembered as. And so loving mother, helpful father, got on those stones. On Virginia's, it was like something like loving wife and friend, something like that. It was very sweet, but these were stock sentiments. These were ones that the memorial company were suggesting, and Alvin was just picking from a menu. And so finally I said, Alvin, let's go ahead and get your grave just to remark your place next to Virginia. And, I kind of freaked him out because, he didn't realize you could put it up without a date of death, But I told him, I said, they'll leave it open. They'll come in later. They'll fill it in once you die. But on the part about the discretionary part, I said, Alvin, you can forever have your position known. Put an innocent man or wrongfully accused. I just thought that was so dramatic. The Ed Johnson case in Chattanooga, that this horrific lynching on the Walnut Street Bridge. They put on his grave, I am an innocent man. which I just thought was so profound. And so I left. I had to leave. I paid for that stone too, and I left. And it was 20 years before I went back to that grave. And I went back with him as well after the trial to on the 20th anniversary of Virginia's death. So it was 2017. And so I just thought I just wanted, him to have a stone there. So I did not know until that day in 2017 what Alvin opted to put on that stone.
TV repairman.
Classic, very literal. Classic, very literal. And by the way, are my things are they backwards when I show them to you?
No,
they are to me.
No, they're good. They're good.
Okay, yeah. Good.
They look good to me.
I don't know this technology. So that's just one of the many surprises that Alvin had in him. And, in a weird kind of poignant way, that's probably how he did want to be remembered.
Sure.
He didn't want to be remembered as a guy accused of this, that, and the other. And, he was very proud of those years that he was a TV repairman. And by every account I've ever heard, including from my own father, Alvin was a hell of a TV repairman. He was incredibly talented. I've had people come up to me and say, he fixed our TV with a copper penny. He shoved a copper penny in somewhere and it just fixed the whole machine. And he never charged much. Yeah. And he when we were picking a jury and finally it came up about what he did. And, because, the DA wanted to know who all had done business with him. And I think they thought it was going to be a negative situation. Have you ever been to the old, I'm not trying to guess your age, Dave, but I know I'm older. So I can say, I remember going to the Hannah Adams store, the classic TV stores that used to exist in Chattanooga and appliance stores. And they would have this kind of very cozy looking living room display. And there would be a TV, and then it would be back to back against another kind of bedroom or living room display, and there would be another fancy TV. Alvin's place was nothing like that. It was a bare concrete floor, warehouse looking thing with disemboweled TV sets on one side that he was working on, and new ones kind of still in boxes or stacked on top of boxes. And so it was not your classic, showcase place. And Alvin really let it go into decline and let the roof fail and giant freezer size hole in the roof, which meant all the weather came in. And he just shut it down in 2014. He was overwhelmed, but in his mind, he thought, well, everybody's run me out of business. And it all started when the county took my van. Well, the county deputy, L.C. Cripps, was acting on the next writ in the stack to go and execute on a judgment, what he thought was a valid judgment. And so they took Alvin's van, which Alvin never stopped talking about. Well, I would love to see the look on my face when I realized that the van was back at his house and had only been gone 3 weeks. But Alvin refused to touch it. So at the time that I realized this, the van had been back for 15 years.
Wow.
Untouched by Alvin. And Alvin's way of thinking that if he touched it, it would trigger a new statute of limitations. I mean, the guy had some really interesting theories. So now it's been 41 years untouched.
That's amazing.
Every now and then, I just go by and touch it just to make sure, you know, it gets a touch every now and then.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you so much, and I don't want to take your day. I know you're very busy. Folks, get this book. It's an amazing story. I mean, and I guess the only question I would have, folks, get the book. You're not going to be disappointed. And is to ask you if you have another book in you. Do you, now that you have this under your belt, is there something else that you would want to look at? Or we've interviewed people before, and they'll say, "I have something I'm working on." Or are you a one and done author, or do you think that
No,
maybe
I
you have
no,
something else?
I got to tell you, I enjoy this process. I enjoyed everything about the book. The only thing I didn't enjoy was editing away that 177,000
Oh
words.
yeah,
I got it down to 103,000 words. So now I was 13,000 words over budget. And I told Michaela Hamilton at Kensington, I said, I can't, I can't remove another word. And she said, that's fine. So I got close enough. But I will tell you that I was not allowed to put something in the book that I really wanted to put. And I know if you've watched any of my social media, you've seen this. But there is a tabloid, the National Examiner, that put this horrible headline in August of 1998 that Alvin and I had to deal with. And that was on every supermarket shelf in the country.
mm,
Calling him a sicko, saying that he had held his wife for 30 years in the basement. And those are hard things to get over, but they wouldn't give me permission to put it in the book now that I proved them wrong. So, if you get your book locally, and by locally, I mean 2 locations in Ringgold, Georgia, one, a Fern and a Feather general store, and the other, Book and Barrel, our new bookstore. They will hold the book for me to come and sign for you. And then, including with that book waiting for you or to be shipped to you, you'll get a bookmark with this headline on it because they didn't give me permission to put it in the book, but nobody tells me what I can put on my bookmark.
that's
And,
right. And I have
so,
mine here,
yeah, so you can visualize and see, the kind of rush to
and he
judgment
and
South Alvin suffered.
he does autograph the book, so
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Well,
great.
their books, unfortunately, maybe they're going by the way of newspapers. They're. But I think that the book as a hardcover print thing is going to be with us a while because people love books, and in the process of a book, if you're lucky enough to get a publication deal, and they do a hardcover, uh, a lot of times you don't get that. But after it's kind of run its course, um, they will come up with what's called the trade edition or the soft cover, the paperback.
Right.
And so I was expecting to be making some edits and to be, maybe updating some things, particularly Alvin's passing last year. But my publisher said, look, we're putting off this paperback edition to 2027 or maybe beyond. And I said, why? And she said, the hardback is still selling. So
Awesome.
it's reached, it's touched enough people who may have someone they love with autism in their life, or they were teachers or service providers. Teachers and service providers will come up to me like I'm an idiot and they'll say, I knew from page one. But we weren't talking about autism in that way back in
Right.
the 90s. And we certainly weren't talking about it about adults. So I get it. But I had to write it from my ignorance at the time because I was pulling my hair out trying to figure out what makes this guy tick and why is he being so uh, literal, and why is he, you know, obsessing over some things. So it may just be one of those perfect place in time for this type of story. So because hopefully um, we're catching uh, and screening and giving services for people with autism. Now, I
Right.
don't want to weigh in on the current debate about autism, but I will tell you that Alvin preceded Tylenol by a decade
Yeah.
at least. And we've had people with autism in our culture of in among mankind forever. And
Yes.
some of our greatest contributors are now known to be on the spectrum. Elon Musk, for example, anybody that can make a rocket land on its, standing up. I'm a kid from the Apollo stuff. You just use those things and let them tumble into the ocean or burn up. But this guy brings them back and lands them
I know.
standing up. That's impressive.
It sure
And
is.
and it's that kind of focused thinking was that described Alvin. And Alvin was brilliant in his own way. And Alvin was pushing me the entire trial to find things that he didn't know how to articulate. So he would just push me to find, for example, the eviction trial. Uh,
Yeah.
he didn't say go look up that eviction trial. He said go look at all the civil litigation and see if I've got anything. Well, he didn't have anything in the civil litigation that I could revive, but I had to do it to humor him, and that's where I found a key file, and that was the fact that he and Virginia were not only evicted in 1970, but this was the last place she was ever seen in the large courtroom in the Catoosa County Courthouse, September 15, 1970.
Wow.
And 27 years later, um, I'm walking in that courtroom with her writings
Amazing.
and a bucket full of cockroaches.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating, and folks, you will get the book, and you will. There'll be moments that are very emotional. There's funny things that happen in there. There's times that uh, Mr. Poston here is not ready to pull his hair out. I mean, he's embarrassed, uh, shocked, mad. There's all the emotions. I mean, that comes out because you were caught off guard so many times of things that Alvin would do, and just the things you had to do to keep this thing going
Book
forward.
is at my
Amazing.
expense. and everything poignant in the book was the realization that Alvin was a human being and not a monster.
Right.
And just to think of how he suffered in silence for a lot of years, being the boogeyman, um so I just loved the guy. He was an incredible. I couldn't stand him during the trial, during the representation, till the very end. And then over the years, as I got to know him better, and then suddenly with the explanation of autism, I just loved the guy. He was just one of the closest people I think I've ever been to uh, in my heart, in my life.
Amazing.
And still took him to lunch twice a week as the book was approaching, because I was reading it to him, and I was getting his input on, is that the way you remembered it, that kind of thing. Finally got him to admit that salesman Sam was wrong to send him to the federal courthouse after spilling gasoline all over himself. Maybe you haven't gotten there, but Alvin was thought by federal authorities to have doused himself with gasoline and running into federal Judge Vining's office in Rome. And, thank God this was before 9/11,
Oh
because
yeah.
they would have probably just shot him. And,
True.
and there's other things that may not have made it in the book. I find it hard to remember now what I put in the book and what got cut. But Alvin told me that once the van was taken, that Virginia told him, well, the only person who could fix this. And Alvin said, who? And Virginia said, Ronald Reagan. Well, Virginia had been carrying on correspondence for all the time she was supposed to be missing and locked up. She's carrying on correspondence with President Richard Nixon, with U.S. Senator David Gambrell, U.S. Congressman John Davis. She's carrying on Robert Schuller of the Crystal Cathedral Ministries. She's carrying on correspondence with all these people the whole time. And, but she had the opinion that only Ronald Reagan could fix the taking of Alvin's van and all the misery that brought to them. So I thought, okay, I've worked in Washington. I'm going to trip him up on this one. I said, okay, Alvin, how long did it take you to get there? He said, well, it took me 2 whole days and 6 quarts of oil. And I thought, well, I've seen some of his cars. So that tracks. And then I said, okay, Alvin, well, where did you go once you got to Washington? He said, to the White House. And I said, you just can't park at the White House. He goes, no, I went to a parking lot. And then I went to the White House. I said, how did you find the White House? He'd say, I asked directions. And so then we get to the meat of the story, and I'm just wanting to show that he's exaggerating or he's making it up. And he said, well, I was on Pennsylvania Avenue where they said the White House is, and there's a big opening on the left side of it. Well, he was being absolutely accurate. There was a big open gate almost constantly, it was at the time, on the left side from the Pennsylvania Avenue, because I worked that very year. I worked in Washington. I'm not sure if it was the time. Wouldn't that be something if I'd run into Alvin Ridley at the White House? But Alvin said, well, I went in it. And I thought, oh, Lord. I said, what happened? He said, 2 men with long guns told me to halt. I said, well, Alvin doesn't have a bit of pride or self-preservation. He's not going to try to make himself look good in a story. He just tells the story as it happened.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what did you say? And he said, they said, why are you here? And he screamed out, Catoosa County took my van. And I said, Alvin, what did you do? What did they tell you? And he said, they told me to go home. So then he says, but I went to a phone booth and I called and I talked to Nancy Reagan. Well, I thought, okay, all right, Alvin, tell me how this works. He said, well, I went to a phone booth and I called the White House. Well, I remembered from my time in Washington, the White House is in the phone book back when we had phone books, because I remember seeing it in there. And I said, well, how do you know you talked to Nancy Reagan? And he looked at me like I was a fool. And he goes, the White House is where they live. A woman answered the phone.
Oh,
and
my
I
goodness.
said, well, what did you tell Nancy Reagan? He said, I told her Catoosa County took my van. And I said, what did Nancy Reagan tell you? He said, to go home. I even contacted the Ronald Reagan Library to see if there was any record of this call by the subject conversation, And they said that there were so many calls that if they didn't have a name, they didn't, necessarily keep it logged. And again, this was back in the day when, so I believe him. I believe that he went to see Ronald Reagan. Now, I don't believe that he talked to Nancy Reagan.
No.
But I believe that Alvin believes that he talked to Nancy
absolutely.
Reagan. And that's all that counts.
That counted for him. For him, that counted.
That's right.
Hey, thanks so much for giving me your time. I'd love to have you come back on sometime. I know you're a busy man, but just know you always have a place that you can come if you want to share stories or updates or that next book you're working on or whatever. the Southern Fried is always here for you. Anytime that you have any time, if you have any, we're always here for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. It's been an honor, and I enjoyed talking with you.
Yes, and folks, you can go get this book at the places he mentioned. It is on audio, and you can find that, I'm guessing, at the major book retailers. They'll have but I know somebody ordered it online. They told me I ordered the audio version, so which I know they pronounced Lafette wrong, but but if you can handle that, for the folks that's above the Mason-Dixon line, you're probably not going to notice a difference. But
right.
Get the book, and then you'll appreciate this great story as well. Thanks so much, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you, Dave. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.